Descartes has so far considered two different possibilities for where the idea of God could have come from that are not from God himself. He wants to sort of run through the process of elimination here and say that if none of the other possibilities are true, it must have come from the actual Catholic God. So the first one he tried, we've talked about, is he looks at his own finite nature and he extrapolates from that. He says, well, the infinite must be just not that. He says that won't work because the infinite must be sort of prior to that. That's where we get the idea of the finite. He then, we just talked about, he looks at, he could, we think, look at his own potential goodness, his own potential wisdom, his own potential power, and say, well, if I just push those to the limits, that's what God will be like. But that's not true either, he says, because God is only actual and not potential, and that Descartes, even pushed to his utmost limits, could never be as perfect as God. He's going to consider a few other sources. So he's going to say, well, look, maybe this idea could have come from some source other than God that's not innate to Descartes, right? So the first two objections were sources that are sort of internal to Descartes. And so the first possibility here, number one, says from Descartes himself, and we saw the problems with those in the first two objections. So the other possibilities, he thinks, are from his parents or his upbringing or some other human source. And he's going to say, well, that won't work because, first of all, we haven't even proven that those people exist yet, though we know that, of course, they do. But in terms of a firm foundation, those aren't going to work. And even if we do know that they exist, we know things about them, they're just like Descartes, right? They're also imperfect mortals. The other possibility is from multiple sources. Not people in this case, right? But we might imagine that Descartes could find one thing out there in the world that's near perfectly or perfectly strong, and one thing, some different thing out there in the world that's perfectly or near perfectly wise, etc., all these perfections that God has, and then sort of just mash them together. He's going to say this won't work either because God has a special feature of unity. So God is not only all of these traits separately that happen to coincide, but there's something special about the fact that they are unified all at once that is unique to God. And so he says that won't work either. So he's tried all of these methods. He says none of them will work. So it's going to come down to it that, well, it must be from God. So he's going to say it in this way. We know an idea must have a cause that is equally or more real than that idea. This is the maybe controversial principle that we've been through already. And he's just going to come out and state the idea of God is already as real as it gets. God himself is perfectly, real, powerful, clear, however you want to think about it. And so the idea of such a God needs to be similar. And so it can't have come from Descartes himself, so it must have come from, because Descartes is not this real, not this clear, not this potent, so it must have come from outside of him. And we know that it can't have come from either other beings like Descartes, or anything that doesn't have all these perfections unified. Well, so if it came from outside of Descartes, rather, how did it get there? Well, it must have come from God. God put it there innately, and he thinks that God put it there so that Descartes could recognize his own origins. So this is sort of like a maker's mark, if you will, the crafter's stamp on Descartes. So if this is true, God must exist to have put this idea there. We have a couple of concerns here. This seems maybe plausible, but it has an awful lot of underlying assumptions, right? Descartes makes this maybe controversial statement about the idea of cause and effect. He's also going to claim that he couldn't have made up the idea of God. And we also might wonder about what's the deal here with the reality of ideas? I'm not entirely sure what that means. I sort of see what he's trying to say, but we might have some reason to doubt him here. So we might wonder, and it would be a good thing to discuss on the discussion boards for this week, are all these assumptions all that plausible? Well, maybe not. And Descartes actually recognizes this. So he's going to make another attempt at proving God in the next meditation on. And so if that works, or if this one works, then Descartes will be well on his way toward getting his knowledge back, being able to really trust all of his clear and distinct perceptions. So we will talk about that in the next video.